Hello, this is Christian Eisinger. This is the OB 320 Midterm 2 review. This is for Chapter 1. This is the first one I'll be putting up. I'm hoping to get all three done tonight, but one might be done tomorrow. But I'll definitely get the first two done tonight. This is Chapter 1. It's called The Strategic Approach to Organizational Behavior. Before I get started, I wanted to say a few quick things about the journal assignment and then also the video assignments. For the journal assignment, if you look in the instructions for what the assignment is for, it says that we want, or Professor Nick wants you to, he says, dig deep and discover some insights that may be valuable for you and your success as you enter the workforce. So this is what Sarah's looking for, but particularly if I'm your TA, this is what I'm looking for. I'm looking for not just how what we're talking about applies to you, but how what we're talking or you're reading about, we're talking about applies to you, and specifically what you're going to do when you get into the workforce. So there's a lot of good application to self. Like we read about being introverted. I'm more introverted. But then we want you to take that and apply it to the workforce and then say something like, I'm more introverted. This means that I should probably pick a career with la 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 la, or I need to work on being more extroverted so that la la la. So that's what the Nick, Sarah, and I are all looking for those. The other thing I want to mention real quick is the video assignment. I don't know how many there are left. I think there's just one, maybe two. They're tricky. They're more difficult. Part of a few things I can say that might help you out is to not take them as a whole question. They're really overwhelming. There's a lot of information in the question and in each of the answers. So don't look at it as a whole. Look at I've mentioned this before, that because the assumption is you haven't seen the movie or the show or whatever, the clip, they get really specific with the information you need. So for example, the one with Joe and the volcano, is it Joe? Anyway, the volcano one. It was really specific that he was going to die anyways. He was a hypochondriac. He didn't have any family. It made it really specific, and that made all the difference in the answer. So when you read the question, look for what it's trying to emphasize, and then when you read the possible answers, go through and look at the answer and go through the book and see if it applies. Don't just look at the question and then try to pick one of the four answers. Pick through the question, figure out what the important information is, then go to A and look at A, what it says, go to the definition in the book, see if it matches up with the question, then move to B so that might help you out with a little bit of those. But like I said, they're kind of tricky. Okay, so anyway, moving on to chapter 1. First of all, one more thing before I get started. Last time I did this, I had advised you to read the chapter summary before you read the chapter. So I remind you to do that because it helps a lot. There's a lot of information in the chapter, and it just kind of winds its way around. It's usually not clear where it's going. But if you read the chapter summary, it's going to give you a good idea of where you're starting, and it takes you to checkpoints all the way to the end. And then when you read, you're just connecting those checkpoints rather than just getting taken for a ride. So I should clarify, it's called what this chapter adds to your knowledge portfolio. Be sure that you're reading that before you read the chapter. Okay, so now moving on to the actual review for chapter 1, a strategic approach to organizational behavior. Organizational behavior. So in the before we started this section of the class, we were talking about building strategic advantage. And so we talked about things like price differentiation, cost strategy. We talked about SWOT analysis, economies of scale. We talked about different ways that your company can use its product, service, or like company structure to build to gain a competitive advantage. You may have noticed that it's kind of taken a shift. The class has taken a shift. We're talking about organizational behavior, and specifically how organizational behavior can be used to build a competitive advantage. So organizational behavior is based on the fact that people are the foundation of a competitive advantage, not the product, but the people that provide the product. So managing organizational behavior would be managing not the people or the activities, but the skills, the attitudes, the attributes of the people. So that's the difference between the first part of the class and this part of the class. It breaks it down into organizational behavior into 3 different aspects. It has the individual, interpersonal, and then organizational. So in terms of organizational behavior, the interpersonal factors would be things like people's personal knowledge, skills, attitudes. Sorry, I think I might say interpersonal. The individual is like an individual's attitude, skills, knowledge. Interpersonal is how those like work together. So this is things like interpersonal factors, things like leadership, communication in an organization. And then organizational structure is things like the culture, the policies, things like that. So the reason these are important is because the book lists that when a company has effective individual factors, what's the word you use? This leads to This leads to an organization or a firm having good productivity. And then interpersonal leads to a firm having high satisfaction. So if a firm has effective individual factors, effective interpersonal factors, and then effective organizational factors, the firm will have a competitive advantage. Oh, I forgot the E. A competitive advantage. So it's important for a firm to have each of these aspects of organizational behavior to gain a competitive advantage. I should mention that I had mentioned that a lot of the chapters kind of just wind their way around. Particularly this one is really windy and just kind of pick something else to talk about. So that being said, the factors that we talked about are implemented by 3 different kinds of people. There's the senior managers, the middle managers, and then the lower level. So senior managers, you probably remember we've talked about before, they decide things like the what industry the firm will enter, how it'll differentiate its product, things like that. And then they're responsible to train and lead the middle managers. The middle managers are in charge of implementing that strategy, but they're also responsible to teach the lower level managers. So don't concern yourself too much with what these people do. They just come up with the strategy. But the lower level managers are in charge of, what's the phrase they use? They're in charge of. The book uses the phrase coaching associates. Associates are just workers. So people at headquarters and then like regional managers and things like that are in charge of coming up with strategy. It's the lower level leaders that are in charge of coaching associates. And so this is where you see organizational behavior, particularly strategic organizational behavior, take place. Okay, jumping to the next thing. The book mentions that when it comes to organizational behavior, there's the foundations. So it talks about how it uses things from psychology, economics, sociology. It uses a bunch of different fields and borrows from all of them to help a firm create a competitive advantage. That's the point of it. And so it borrows from these things so it can affect behavior to create a competitive advantage. All right, jump into the next thing. The definition of an organization. Organization. So I think it's six. I think 6 different things that make up an organization. And I'm going to change the order because it makes more sense. An organization has a division of labor, so there's each person has a different job that they're in charge of, or each group has a different job they're in charge of. They're coordinated activities, though, so they work together. They work together toward a common goal. It's a network, so kind of along the same line of coordinated activities. They're working together. The system, of course, goes along with that as well. There's a way that things work. And then the last one. A community over time. These are really self-explanatory. Community over time. If you think about a company, like a big company like General Electric, of course it hasn't been the same employee since the day they first opened their doors. There's been multiple CEOs. There's been a whole different, stockholders, shareholders. It's been the same organization that's been. The people have been changing, but the community itself has been shifting a lot. So this is what makes an organization an organization. And then, okay. The next section is the role of human capital in creating a competitive advantage. So a real quick definition of human capital, intangible things in an organization. I guess I should clarify. Intangible aspects of the people in an organization. So not things like machinery, production line. This is things like, this is the human capital. So the skills they have, the knowledge they have, the attributes they have, the attitudes they have, their abilities, that's human capital. That's what makes the people valuable. So using human capital create a competitive advantage. If you remember last midterm, we talked about something called VRIO or VRIO. This is using whatever the company does to create a competitive advantage. So the V is value, rareness, imitability, and then organized to exploit. So a company, if you remember, I used the example of the Bellagio fountains. Um, it's valuable. People value it. It's rare because there's only one Bellagio. This is kind of where that example broke down, but we were talking about how it's not necessarily unimitatable. Other people can make a water fountain as well. And then organized to exploit, we had mentioned it's not organized to exploit. It's not organized to make money. So using human capital to create a competitive advantage uses all these same aspects except organized to exploit. It does not use, if you think about like Alcoholics Anonymous or other nonprofit organizations, they're definitely an organization. They fit those 6 definitions, but they're not there to make money. So not organized to exploit. However, they still need these aspects. So I'll write them down. I'm gonna write bigger. So the workers in an organization need to have value, meaning that they are capable of producing whatever the firm is trying to produce. If you work in a construction company and nobody's capable of building a house, your workers are of no value. No offense. Rareness. So their skills need to be unique to that industry. So back to the construction example. If you're in a construction business that builds houses, your workers may be capable, but they're really good at building dog houses. So their skills aren't unique to that. Actually, maybe that wasn't a good example. Let me think for a second. Yeah, that's good enough anyway. Rareness is the skills that they have are unique to that industry. And then imitability, meaning can it be copied? So maybe you have workers that are capable of building houses. They're very good at building houses. And they build houses much stronger that are more earthquake resistant than any other house. And no other company knows how to do it. Then your workers you would have a competitive advantage through your employees, through your human capital, because the other companies aren't going to be able to do all of this. It's a sustained competitive advantage. If you remember, we talked about sustained competitive advantage last time, that this would meet the aspects of a sustained competitive advantage using human capital. Okay. And now again, jump into the next thing. Positive organizational behavior. I'm going to turn to it in the book. Okay, positive organizational behavior. The point of this section is talking about, as it says, positive organizational behavior nurtures each individual's greatest strengths and helps people use those strengths to the organization's advantage. So this is, for example, why companies will pay for one of their employees' master's program, nurturing their strengths, helping them to get better. And then it benefits the worker and the organization. They get to use that knowledge that's been gained, and then it helps it's nurturing the employee's strengths. This is effective because it helps the employees to be happier, more productive, and less stressed, to just have greater job satisfaction. And then the book says also it increases the firm's emotional intelligence. EI stands for emotional intelligence. So it just helps the firm and the company to work better. together, more trusting, better relationships. EI, emotional intelligence. And then at the end of the chapter talks about, the key characteristics of high involvement management. So high involvement management, don't be confused by this phrase. I remember reading it and getting really caught up on high involvement management versus other kinds of management. High involvement management is effective management. Other kinds of management are not effective. So in this book, we'll only talk about high involvement management. The only kind of management you need to contrast that with is poor management, with poorly managed companies. So it'll bring up that phrase high involvement management through other chapters. Just know that means good management, a company that is well managed. So there's 5 aspects of high involvement management. The first is selective hiring. So if you have an on-campus job, you might have noticed that, especially in places like the Cougary, you kind of just apply and you have the job. It's not incredibly selective hiring. High involvement management would have multiple rounds of interviews with multiple people. Anyway, the next would be extensive training. So speaking of on-campus jobs, my wife recently got hired at a on-campus job and received no training. I'm still not sure who her manager is. I'm not entirely sure she knows who her manager is, but so not well trained. That's a bad example of high involvement management. That is very low involvement management. What is the phrase? So decision power, high involvement, firms that exhibit high involvement management give authority to their employees to make decisions. This is, think about a company that is always, the leader's always micromanaging and really they're making all the decisions. The employees or the middle managers or even the lower level managers don't have any decision power. They just do whatever they're told. That would be an example of poor, of low involvement management. The fourth is information sharing. So this kind of goes right along with the one before. A firm that practices high involvement management gives necessary information to the people who need it. Think about a firm that's trying to set goals to increase their productivity. Think about like an appliance store. We'll talk about Lowe's. If Lowe's hasn't been selling as many refrigerators, and they want to set a goal they want to sell more refrigerators, but they won't share the information of how many they're selling to the people that are going to make the change, then they wouldn't be able to make the decision. If they don't mention, hey, we haven't been selling enough French door refrigerators, then the people who make the decision won't know that they need to get better at that. A kind of a lame example, but it gets the point across. And then the last one is incentive compensation. This goes, let's see. So the firm needs to just compensate positively, not just in terms of money, not just monetary compensation, but also things like the employees feel valued, they receive compliments when they do a good job, things like that. So these 5 things are the key characteristics of high involvement management. Let me see if I missed anything. Managers must trust associates not to abuse decision power. Associates must trust managers not to punish them for mistakes when they are trying to do good things for the organization. I think that's about it for this chapter. The next chapters will make a lot more sense. They're laid out a lot more clearly. There's a specific topic or goal. This was just kind of laying a groundwork for the rest of the book, to be honest, and what organizational behavior is. So I will be back with the next chapter, which is actually chapter 4.